So welcome. Greetings to everyone. Now the sound is being checked, and we begin our webinar. Recording is enabled, so while we still have 2 minutes before we start, there will be a little briefing. Greetings to everyone. Greetings to everyone on this wonderful Thursday evening. Today's webinar will not be about anti-fraud systems. It will be about anonymity. The fact is that when people ask questions to supports, very often people come to us from webinars that were recorded in 2017, 2016 and are interested in the methods that were considered then. And unfortunately, a large number of people at the moment are actually asking the same question. This is a matter of changing identifiers and phone numbers, but not for working with anti-fraud systems, but in terms of anonymity. We also dropped links to supports to various services on the network. We will not take a close look at any of them today. Therefore, I will just give you information for reflection and for independent work, and you will decide how to deal with this information. So, welcome to today's webinar. We can begin. Our main topic today is the topic of IMEI spoofing. The IMEI spoofing theme is very simple. There is nothing super complicated about it, but nevertheless, there is one very big cornerstone that makes some users not quite understand what they are doing. After all, visually everything is fine with them, but in fact, unfortunately, there are problems that are architectural problems and cannot be eliminated in any way, let's say visually. Unfortunately, some unscrupulous businessmen take advantage of this, take advantage of the ignorance of users, exposing them to quite a lot of danger. After all, who knows what exactly you are using your anonymous phone for? Well, here we go. So, my acquaintance with such a parameter as IMEI came from my distant childhood. In the early 2000s, I was engaged in reselling mobile phones. In principle, then the mobile phone did not just appear, but let's say it began to appear en masse. And already school children began to have phones, students, and ordinary users, ordinary people, let's say. And there was always a different kind of turnover. Someone lost their phones, someone constantly lost them. Someone needed these phones. And in particular, in order to comprehend how the phone can be found, law enforcement agencies can find it if, for example, some person lost it and suddenly accidentally wrote a statement to the police. In order to avoid this, I had to download a dial-up modem and, at that time, quite voluminous materials in English, plus additional software for the download of which sometimes even for the usual 18 megabytes. I clearly remember a utility called EasySim, but not from a SIM card, but from the abbreviated Siemens. EasySim allowed you to change the IMEI parameters in Siemens phones without any problems, just by connecting it with a fairly wide one, who remembers the old Siemens and their wide charging port. Thanks to this cable, you could connect to your PC running Windows XP and magic happened. The IMEI changed, and in principle the phone remained, or rather became absolutely clean. And if this Siemens was also my favorite model, such as the A50 or A55, then it was even possible to change the case. And accordingly, you had a blue phone that turned into a gray phone in color. And it was a completely new device that was 100% legitimate. But more than 20 years have passed since then. A lot has happened since then. But still, the problem of changing IMEI, the problem of changing IMEI correctly is still there. Despite the fact that just recently, maybe 10 years ago, it was not, and any school child could change the IMEI without any problems. The essence of today's webinar will contain another very important point. My webinar will not touch on my products there and so on. This is pure theory and practice on common phones, on all those that are available now. And this practice will give you one very important point, which I will try to reveal today. After all, If any of you can implement what I am going to tell you today, then you will be able to occupy a very good niche of the market, which is now being formed thanks to the measures that the government is taking. And in particular, as one philosopher said, today not everyone can look at tomorrow. And indeed, many of you may watch today's webinar and think, yes, cool information, I will definitely remember it, but someone will still watch and make it so that perhaps in a couple of webinars I will be talking about and advertising his service. Who knows? So, asterisk, grid, 0, 6, grid. You may not be familiar with the code. Well, maybe someone is not as old as I am, but nevertheless, by entering this combination on the keypad of your mobile phone, you can see information about the IMEI addresses in your phone. SIM card information. This is not important to us at the moment. We can fill in and remember this code, although in fact it will not help us in any way. But it was precisely with it that IMEI verification systems began, since previously on feature phones, not smartphones, it was the main code by which one could understand whether your IMEI change operation was successful or not. But what exactly is IMEI? IMEI is essentially an international device identifier, a unique device identifier, which consists of several parts. In total, the IMEI has 15 characters, but in fact the IMEI itself is only 14 characters, while the 15th character is something like a checksum. But for those who want to, you can familiarize yourself with how this IMEI is formed, for example. I won't burden you with that information now, as today's webinar will be very short, maybe half an hour, 40 minutes, and then we'll move on to Kanda. So our IMEI ID, which is present in any device that is included in it, which allows you to connect to cellular networks, is used to identify this device as we understand it from its name. Well, in fact, that's all. It is not used in any other way, since in order to connect to the network, SIM card identifiers are used, and the IMEI ID can be changed, can be reset in fact. You can do a lot of interesting different things with it. The main thing is to do these things correctly. I will tell you how to do it correctly today. In fact, your phone connects to the operator's network, and then the operator's network, thanks to requests, for example, or not requests, but internal rules, can initiate, for example, blocking of this device or law enforcement agencies that this device is, for example, stolen, or apply some temporary sanctions to this device. For example, if the device is imported into the territory of the country where it is served, in the gray zone. We have figured out what IMEI is, but where is it stored? Probably many of you think that IMEI is somewhere hard-coded, maybe in the configuration files of our phone. Not really. In fact, the IMEI is located, it is recorded in our modem. A modem that allows us to connect to a cellular network. It is recorded there by the manufacturer and is located in a protected area, as B, access to which is restricted, so that the user does not have the opportunity to personally change this identifier. And referring to the next slide, the IMEI is not on the file system, and you will not be able to change it in any way by reinstalling the operating system or by any other such simple means. That is, the identifier is quite stable. Time has made him so. 20, even 15 years ago, the average user didn't really think about changing an IMEI. Techs, however, would change it without any issues. Now we have such a situation that even ordinary users sometimes wonder, and how can I change the IMEI if I want, for example, to go somewhere with my mistress and so on? So how does Android get the IMEI? An app meaning any applet you run on your phone can access the Android framework, then the radio interface, which in turn accesses the modem. The modem, in which in fact the IMEI itself is located. The modem then reports back to the application which specific ID is embedded in it, transmitting this info for further analysis. In fact, that's all. But there is another important thing that I would like to say right away. There are some utilities that allow you to change the IMEI. For those unfamiliar, Xposed, Xposed utilities. These utilities allow you to change the IMEI, but unfortunately, some users do not quite understand their purpose. Indeed, if you refer to the official web resources presenting these software products, the developers themselves write there that they use substitution, not modification. That is, they do not hide it. And in fact, they have never stated that their software products, with the help of which most users now change the IMEI, that their software products are used specifically for changing. No, they use the term substitution, the term spoofing. Therefore, virtually all changes occurring now at the phone level, found in various manuals or semi-commercial products assembled by individuals, are primarily focused solely on the software running on that phone. And in fact, we have the following situation here. That when the module of a product like Xposed or Xposed, great products by the way, I have a small typo on the slide. If a user runs products such as Xposed and Xposed on their phone in order to change their IMEI, the so-called hook procedure takes place. And in particular, an application that, for example, wants to go to the modem in order to get the IMEI, it will receive the IMEI of the one it provides, AAAA, for example, Xposed, when implementing this hook, including our sacred combination 062, will receive IMEI exactly along the same route that some third-party program can get it, for example. Or, for example, the properties of the system, when you can go to the properties of your Android phone and then see what IMEI is there. The path, in fact, is the same. Is it a good way or a bad one? Let's take a look. The thing is, in fact, the path is wonderful, and I can't say anything bad about Xposed, because on its own as an all-in-one product, it's great, it's really cool, awesome. But unfortunately, there is another problem. The problem is not with this product, but the problem is that people are not using it quite correctly. Because this product allows you to implement a hook at the software level, that is, at the level of the Android operating system, it cannot, as you can tell, implement such a hook at the level of your modem. In other words, while you have the IMEI replaced in the phone itself and in all software products, you see that your IMEI has been replaced at the same time your operator sees the real IMEI. And here is now a very important point about our webinar. We will not discuss anti-detection techniques now. That is, we will not discuss the fact that you need to install some application in order to replace the IMEI. No, our main task now is precisely the issue of anonymity. Let's imagine that for some incomprehensible reason, you and I will protect people who like to distribute cats, figuratively speaking. Do you know what I mean? Not to ban YouTube. So, imagine such a person, figuratively speaking, who has read a lot of guides on anonymity, maybe even went to some forum, and from some self-taught person, it is difficult to call them otherwise, took and bought a manual for setting up a phone. Or perhaps he also bought the phone itself. This can also happen. That's it. And the person thinks that everything is okay. He trusts the one from whom he bought. checks on all tests. If you go "Jo, das Sickurs, everything is cool," the IMEI has been replaced. For example, install some program from the Play Store that allows you to see this IMEI. The IMEI has also been replaced. Well, everything is cool, isn't it? That is, indeed, a person thinks that he bought a cool product. And here lies the greatest danger. The biggest danger is that a person, blindly trusting this product, becomes careless. And why have I just mentioned the distributors of cats? Because this person who understands that he will be hunted, he, fully trusting this device, deceives himself, becomes careless, and as a result, this person is taken by the ass. That's it. He cannot understand how it is. Every evening, coming home from work, for example, or being at work, I change the IMEI every evening, change the IMEI, change the SIM card. Why? How did they take me? But unfortunately, a person does not even understand that the manual that he bought or that software product is absolutely non-working in his sense. If this cat distributor played in his casino, he would have no problem. If he had launched some poker, everything would have been great for him, because poker would have followed the software path and would not have followed the path of a mobile operator. But at the same time, when the user has chosen this type of earnings, then, alas, in this case, none of these software products that we have on the market at the moment can replace the information that goes between our modem and between the cellular network. However, it is worth mentioning, of course, various kinds of engineering utilities that allow you to change the IMEI when connecting to a computer and reprogramming and so on. We will discuss this a little later. But the bottom line is that if you use it, if you are not a cat distributor, but you need anonymity, then such software products, unfortunately, that are suitable for anti-detection will absolutely not suit you as anonymity. And your mobile operator will always see your device, including a very popular case, if you can call it that. It's when a person has his legitimate real phone number and, for example, goes to a forum and buys himself some kind of grey phone. And this grey phone, it sees that it changes the IMEI, everything is cool, and the user can roll it along with him, turn it on from time to time when he needs to change the IMEI? Well, in fact, unfortunately, he will not see in the fact that all his actions remain absolutely without a trace. Well, let's say useless at the level of a mobile operator, which will always see the real IMEI of the user and the real IMEI of the user's phone. And if you want, you can, in principle, tell us in more detail here. I have now displayed two paths on your screens. The first path is the Android API path, that is, the program path that works flawlessly. In fact, yes, Xposed is a really great product to implement such a software substitution path. But unfortunately, there is also a second way. This is the path of the radio stack, that is, the path of our modem, where the information is transmitted through the firmware to ours. Thanks to the firmware, it is transmitted to our modem and then transmitted to the cellular network operator, and our real IMEI goes to this cellular network operator. The first part of the webinar will now end. Again, our webinar will be condensed and very fast. The first part. And let's draw a small conclusion. For Android phones, there's a big difference between how this device is positioned. It is positioned as an anonymous phone, or it is positioned as a phone for working with multi-accounting. And very often, these parameters are confused by both sellers and customers. After all, when buying a phone in which the IMEI is supposedly changed, the user thinks that this phone is anonymous. But in fact, alas, I'm not ready to answer for everything, the services that are on the network. We will look at some of them today. Maybe you'll recognize yours. But nevertheless, at the moment I have not seen, only from the ads, and according to the reviews of users who wrote to supports, I have not seen a single service that could provide exactly part of anonymity and not part of multi-accounting and virtual bypass of the same IMEI in the software path. And here perhaps some of you may object. But Vector, how can this be? It is good if the IMEI is changed, for example, through the program. Why, when I connect my phone using ADB to my computer, my IMEI is also spoofed? And here I would like to ask the question, to answer this question. And the answer to this question can be as follows. The thing is, your ADB should not be confused with fastboot. Well, for those who, let's say, have different modes of phone connection, ADB is just a remote terminal and it follows the same software path as any other program that is installed on your mobile phone. And in some phone models, it is possible to request IMEI using, for example, the same fastboot. But this is more of a special case and not, well, a large-scale, let's say, practice. Therefore, here is one of the users in the chat. I will answer his question. User A Leander7. I apologize. Nickname with symbols. I hope I read Leander7Web3 correctly. There was a K. Ask the question in the chat. Once upon a time, there was a phone reflashed by Jelly on a 4.4 bucket. There you could use ADB from the computer to specify absolutely any IMEI for both SIM cards, at least one. The SIM cards worked. Was it also a fake? The first part is about ADB. I hope I have answered it now, but I will repeat it again. ADB is just a remote terminal, nothing more. It follows the program path. It does not have any preferences for access to your equipment. Nothing, in fact. Therefore, answering the user's question, I unfortunately do not know what is, well, how it was reflashed on the fourth Android. We will now come to the fourth Android. But the fact that your IMEI changes in ADB does not mean anything at all. Just like if it changed for you when entering the combination *grid 06 grid. But what about Android? Let's now take a look at it and go a little into history. Why earlier, for example, let's take the same user, ask the question Android number, 4.4. Why was it possible to change IMEI without any problems before, but now it doesn't? The fact is that the Android operating system itself began to introduce various kinds of restrictions and tightening. If earlier, for example, on the same Android of the second version, the third and the same fourth, that is, on any versions up to the fifth, it was not particularly difficult to replace the IMEI, especially if you used MTK processors, that is, a phone with an MTK processor, the specifications of which were then available on the network or leaked into the network? At the moment, unfortunately, I don't remember. There were many utilities for different phone models with which you could change the IMEI. And the fact is that he really changed. We will now see how this could be determined. But after systems such as SELinux or Decrypt were introduced, unfortunately, well, verified boot is the same. Unfortunately, the use of such utilities is no longer possible in the sense in which we used them 15 years ago. Also, of course, it's worth noting that many phones had special menus that allowed you to change these settings. In my practice, I remember a great phone, and I'm not joking here, it was really a beautiful Chinese called Prestigio. Prestigio 5500. The Prestigio 5500 had apparently an engineering menu from the factory, which could be accessed quite easily. It was just a matter of playing with the sound keys, if I'm not mistaken. It was a long time ago, so I may be a little wrong. And you got into the engineering menu, in fact, relatively speaking, in a kind of anti-detect. It was possible to change the parameters of the hardware which I was playing with at that time until, unfortunately, I could completely, or rather, I was able to completely screw up this phone. That's it. Well, this also needs to be approached quite carefully. But nevertheless, such one might say, hardware backdoors were laid by manufacturers directly from the factory. And then, when this information was distributed to some service centers, it also got into the internet, from where it came to you and me. And in particular, since we are considering a small such story of Android for ourselves specifically, I have highlighted the next time period, or the next point, let's say. With the introduction of Android version 5, I remember very well how everything fell apart. All the utilities that worked before without any problems, and we are talking here not only about changing the IMEI, but also about changing the rest of the identifiers, and some were even and changing the voice, and some more. So, well, the set was quite large scale, but it was all mainly, let's say, a public. All this fell apart. And in fact, starting from the 5th version, I don't know, maybe someone has it differently, but I realized for myself that the system has very tightened the rules, and unfortunately it will not be the same as before. Well, in fact, it was possible to stay on the 4th version of Android, which the user just mentioned, for quite a long time. In principle, until 2017-18, this was absolutely no problem. But unfortunately, now there is no such opportunity. Well, we can launch, for example, a 4th Android, but using it with modern software will be categorically bad. We're now living during Android version 16, and in this version, in fact, if you don't have some kind of specialized device, then making all the substitutions that we need will be, well, not impossible, but at least extremely difficult. And if we want to completely replace the information directly in the modem, then in this case, we need to interact only with it. Don't forget about the operating system, forget about everything else, and maybe try to change it in some way with our third-party PC. Well, in fact, of course, I will give you a solution today. It will be, let's say, maybe unusual for someone, but nevertheless, it will solve the issue of anonymity 100%. But this is not a question of anti-detection. Why? Because you will find out further. So the days of the old Androids are gone. On new Androids, alas, we cannot do this. And in fact, manufacturers have stopped leaving any backdoors in their phones. At the moment, I can say that of the more or less modern phones, I have only found information about Oppo phones. And the Chinese brand, if I'm not mistaken, is either a rebranding of another brand called BBK or just some related product. And therefore, in fact, at the moment, due to the fact that manufacturers have stopped, and by decrease, to fill their phones with backdoors, and Android itself of the new versions has enabled the integrity check of the perimeter of the system, enabled the verified boot check, turned on the SELinux check. Alas, unfortunately, the works that worked before, the simplicity with which we could change our IMEI, all this is a thing of the past. But nevertheless, the market is quite saturated at the moment. The market is saturated, and I will explain to you why. Because if you go to a search engine and enter, for example, buy a phone with a change of IMEI, you can find, for example, such ads. Today, I came in specifically before the webinar and looked at what is offered on the market. Well, there is, for example, for 2,500 rubles. I don't even know what kind of Android model it is. In principle, what is done with it is also unclear, but nevertheless, the person sells it as a smartphone without IMEI. That's right, cool. Why do I need IMEI at all? You can simply reset it. In fact, I would say that this is really possible. Perhaps a person really does not have an IMEI on his device. I will not say otherwise, but nevertheless, this is absolutely not a way out. There are also, of course, entire instructions on how to use the wonderful Xposed framework in order to change the IMEI. And here again, if you turn to, for example, the web resource that you see now on your screens, you will also see that the developers say that they do not replace, they do not change the IMEI, they replace it. That is, there is a big difference, but just the syntax in which it is written. That is, changing or spoofing, for example, or rewriting and spoofing can mislead the user. Because in Russian, for example, substitution means everything has been replaced completely. But nevertheless, there are even more interesting devices on the market. For example, I found such a device in Kazakhstan. It is called a cryptophone. The Samsung model, if I'm not mistaken, is something like the Samsung D800 or D900. And here, even the pro seller writes that cryptophone change IMEI is that it automatically changes its IMEI code with every call. Changing the SIM card or turning it on and off. I wonder how. Well, okay, even if we believe that a person has implemented this, which personally speaking, I doubt, because there is absolutely no logic here. And the one who was supposed to implement this had to be friends with this logic in some way. But having the same SIM card constantly changing the IMEI every time you make a call is, well, idiocy to say the least. But not as idiotic as my today's absolute favorite. This is a Ukrainian website that is called Spy.com.ua. You just can't find a better web resource, bitch, on the entire internet. This is a genius. I don't know who their marketer is. I don't know the Palm d'Or. Take it from someone, give it to him. Here you just immediately dial phones without IME code. That's it. That is, well, in fact, there is not even a way to retreat. No change, nothing, just no IME right away. Well, this is for those who want to buy bank cards on the left without a passport, or electricity meter stops and bugs with wiretapping. But nevertheless, the market is filled with this. And unfortunately, if it is present on the market, then there is still a demand for it. After all, if a person, figuratively speaking, is in some business, he experiences certain problems with the security forces. Can this happen? Maybe. Figuratively speaking, this businessman begins to be milked. He doesn't want to be tracked when he's moving. It is clear that they can monitor the car, and so on. But the phone is a pretty important device because it's actually a bug in your pocket. And what is left for this businessman? Well, he will maybe go to the Spy.com.ua website and buy himself a phone without IMEI. He doesn't understand. He knows a lot about trading, but he doesn't know much about technology. And what will happen then? Even if these miracle devices that we see now on your screens, even if these miracle devices are real, which I personally very much doubt, then we come to the next problem. On the problem of the so-called balaclava principle. When anonymity is inversely proportional to our anonymity in fact as well, that is, our methods by which we try to achieve that anonymity are inversely proportional to our goal. In this case, imagine an absolutely ordinary network, for example, in a residential area. And in this residential area, all of a sudden, this businessman of ours opens a parcel with this miracle phone from the Spy.com.ua website, turns on this phone, and even if he is lucky and he firstly will be sent it, secondly it will turn on, then thirdly, if there really is no IMEI or the IMEI is just 0, then this device will be incredibly noticeable because it will be different from all the others. After all, 0 IMEI or its absence is an anomaly, and this device actually turns into a kind of unique tracker that is not subject to, let's say, correlation with a real device. That is, this is not a changed IMEI, for example, not changed, let's say, or not an IMEI stolen from the store, but this is absolute nonsense. That is the ravings of a madman, only zeros, which, alas, will certainly be visible to the mobile operator, and operational officers can only laugh at this fucker who bought himself such bullshit. But still, don't think that it's only on sites like Spy.com.ua that such business is thriving. In fact, there is quite a large niche on various kinds of forums. I will not advertise all forums, I will only turn to my favorite Dark Money forum. And even on Dark Money there is a person who teaches how to change IMEI and asks for only $1,000 for it. Here are the models on which it is possible to change, available even on Avito. To be honest, I went to this web resource. Those models that I know, I looked there, well, except for some old ones, alas, I did not find, but nevertheless, a person sells. By the way, he did not pass the check on the forum which the moderators requested. There is another person. Here, he is already a businessman. Hi, I will buy 3 phones with 0 ME. Here, a person apparently needs anonymity. He really wants it, but unfortunately, due to lack of knowledge, a person wants to buy phones with 0 IMEI. And in this case, such a person is absolutely easy to deceive. After all, you take a regular phone, put Xposed on it, replace IMEI with all zeros. You take it, send this phone to a person. He checked. Yes, everything is cool, everything is super, everything works. Thank you very much, dear seller. And then who knows why he will use this phone, but its end will definitely not be as sweet as we would like. And for example, here's another. I will sell Android phones with IMEI change with different software. Unfortunately, why am I showing all this now? The fact is that the niche of changing IMEI, namely the real IMEI change, is not actually occupied at the moment. I repeat, I did not find a single resource. Maybe, of course, I was looking in the wrong place. Who knows? Maybe there's some kind of underground, super dark cypherpunk forum, and there's a funny character sitting there and telling everyone how he changes everything. In fact, I did not find a single such resource, and nevertheless, the niche is completely empty. Why don't I occupy this niche? After all, really, if you're so smart here that you can sell phones, why don't you take them yourself and start selling them? This is an absolutely reasonable question. I'll tell you this. I have been doing this for quite a long time, and here is the proof of this. Web resource vector t13.pro. On this resource, this is an old resource. It is no longer functioning at the moment. All the goods that's out there they're not for sale anymore. This is, let's say, a mini museum, one might say. And then, indeed, we had the opportunity to use and sell phones with an IMEI change. At that time, it was, I would say, 2016, 2017. Phones that were based as secure phones were positioned. One of their functions was just to change the IMEI. And at that time, I even held webinars where I used IMSI Catcher to show that the phone's IMEI had really been replaced. By the way, for those who are interested or want to work in this field, you can now organize an IMS catcher for yourself with the help of a project that I am going to throw to you now. That is, what is it? Its own, relatively speaking, small base station, its own cellular network. But I don't recommend doing it, of course, because in some countries it can be punishable. In particular, in the Emirates, just a couple of days ago, a group of people was arrested who used their cellular network based on Blade RF and this Open5G's project, which I dropped to you. Among all the projects, I will single out this one because it is a great core for the implementation of IMSI Catcher. And with this project, it has excellent project documentation. You can send this documentation to Copilot. Copilot is a great friend of it, and Copilot will allow you to implement your IMSI Catcher, well, literally in one evening. But back to my phone. At that time, we were using OnePlus brand phones, and we only had 2 models at that time, OnePlus 3T and OnePlus 5T. On the rest of the models, alas, I don't know if the IMEI was changed for any reason, whether it was my crookedness or some architectural feature, but unfortunately it was impossible. It was on the OnePlus 3 and OnePlus 5 phones that we changed the IMEI, but we changed it as follows. The phone booted into fast boot mode and then connected to the computer where we had the software installed, where the Qualcomm utility was installed. and accordingly it was possible to change the IMEI as needed. In fact, this utility was given together with the phone separately on a flash drive, along with instructions as a user, accordingly to make changes, and also together, I remember, with a small bat script that generated a more or less correct IMEI. Of course, there were still small questions about this, but these are actually technologies from 10 years ago, and at the moment the situation has changed a little. I don't sell such phones at the moment, and answering the question I asked myself, why don't I, for example, want to occupy a niche selling such phones now? The fact is that in order to sell such phones, you need to remove publicity from your life, and publicity, well, and devote yourself completely to this project. And unfortunately, due to my rather large busyness with Anti-Detect and other projects, I cannot unfortunately dissipate on another, albeit promising project. But for you, this is a magnificent field. Moreover, you can buy a tool that will help you in this matter on the internet on your own, without my help and without any intervention. But is the game worth the candle? Do users need it? After all, now, if you analyze the forums, well, let's put it this way. There is a constant demand, but nevertheless, maybe not as great as you would like. And in order to answer this question, whether there will be a demand, I want to acquaint you with another crap that will be important not only to those who want to organize this kind of business for themselves. By the way, regarding consultations, for example, do not write to me, I do not consult on this issue. So alas, I gave all the information publicly. So, even for ordinary users, changing the IMEI will be important. I'll explain why. I will explain using the example of sunny Turkey. In sunny Turkey, if, well, you don't know, I'll talk about it just in case. When you go to a store, you buy an iPhone, you buy it, well, for about, not for $2,000, that's just the usual price in a store. How many are in the Apple Store? Well, let's count. $2,000 costs, for example, the last iPhone. In Turkey, you will pay, if I am not mistaken, in the region of $3,700. Why? Because there are high taxes. High taxes. But how can Turkey live with this? After all, it's so cool. You pack yourself a full suitcase or a boat full of iPhones, bring them to Turkey, and you profit quietly. But unfortunately, no. The fact is that according to the norms, I do not know whether they can be called laws. According to the norms, if the phone is not registered in Turkey on a special portal and appears on the territory of Turkey, connects to local mobile operators, it has only 120 days. After 120 days, his IMEI is blocked and the phone does not perform its functions as a phone. These are not fairy tales, this is reality, the one that exists now. Who did not rest there, for example, last year, welcome to Google and look at this information. Accordingly, Turkey has made it so that, in fact, you cannot import, for example, the same smuggled iPhones, some smuggled Samsung Galaxy, and so on. Why? Because they simply won't work. And even the users themselves, residents of Turkey, who know about this, they simply will not buy these phones from you. The maximum that they can buy it for spare parts, or if at a very reasonable price, for resale somewhere, for example, in Bulgaria, where there are no such norms yet. But on the territory of Turkey, these phones are useless, and in fact, Turkey is, well, you can say so, a pioneer in this, let's say, in these measures, because also, in addition to Turkey, many other countries are resorting, or have already resorted to such measures. But the full list of them is now in front of you. In Turkey, these norms are most pronounced. Let's put it this way. But, for example, Indonesia and the wonderful sunny, well, at the moment already rainy, overpopulated Bali has the same problem. If you are going to live there for a long time, then you will face exactly the same problem as in Turkey. That is, tourists come in, stay, there are no problems, everything is in order. But if you're going to live and work on the territory of this state, then you will have problems. In fact, for the average person, well, not to say that this is a big problem, right? That is, you just took it, well, registered the phone, paid a certain fee once, and at this point, you can, in principle, end this opus. But if we are talking about people who need anonymity for their affairs, because the government in the form of special services cannot always protect a person, and it often happens that the special services themselves are the one from whom a person needs protection. In general, there can be a huge number of situations, but nevertheless, changing the IMEI, it can be required by absolutely any of you. And as you can imagine, and of course there are people who want to get this anonymity for all kinds of bad deeds, that is, who need to hide. And if you think that these are only countries such as, for example, Bangladesh, or for example, Uzbekistan, Pakistan, then in the Russian Federation, for example, such norms will be introduced from 2027. And if I'm not mistaken, from 2028, it will no longer be possible to launch an unregistered phone. By the way, an interesting point. Where can I get the IMEI to change? And you always have mobile phone stores where you can come, dial an asterisk, a grill, a 0, a 6, a grill, and get the IMEI of an actually legitimate phone, which is imported into the country absolutely legally. And so you can accordingly use such IMEI for some time, which of course I do not recommend to you, but I'm obliged to tell you about this possibility as a lecturer. If we go back to the same list of countries, then that, let's say, what now seems to you not quite promising, maybe some, you again miss a quote from this philosopher. If you start preparing today for something that will be popular in a year, then in a year you will be king in this matter. And if you wait and think, yes, I'll start in a year, then in a year you'll have to serve someone else who started it a year ago. But let's get back to all this, from various kinds of opuses to what can be used at the moment. I have identified three main categories. The first category is the technologies of the noughties, old phones. Old phones that can, for example, Siemens, for example, connect to a computer. And if you manage to run, for example, a utility for changing IMEI in a virtual machine somewhere in Windows XP, then cool, you will have a device that can change IMEI. In fact, this will solve the problem. But that's only if you only need voice communication. Well, if you need any multimedia capabilities, then you will already have a rather big difficulty here, since you will not be able to do anything on such phones. Neither work with files, nor with photos, nor with videos, nor with instant messengers. The second category is the technologies of the tens. That is, for example, the same Prestigio 5500 phone, which I just mentioned, or take the OnePlus 3T, OnePlus 5T phones, which, in my opinion, even at the moment they are quite good, but unfortunately have the same difficulties. Old hardware, that is, the fact that your battery can swell at any time, and then you will have to look for it for a long, long time. And I don't even know if such spare parts are sold now in the modern world. Maybe you will find them in some distant countries, but let's say it is unlikely. So, the use of technologies of the noughties, unfortunately, will lead to the fact that you may have problems with the hardware. Also, if you can't install new operating systems, you'll have trouble installing messengers or other apps targeting modern Android systems. So alas, there will also be a problem. But nevertheless, unlike the technologies of the noughties, you can use various multimedia features, work with photos, videos, or entry-level files. Well, the third option is the technology of the 20s. The technology of the 20s is specialized devices such as Infinix and PinePhone. Full support for modern software, modern multimedia capabilities, ease of operation, and disadvantages for me personally. What kind of device it is, I will tell you now. And in fact, I am now showing you the algorithm for changing IMEI on phones called PinePhone. Just a few commands. These commands are executed in the mobile phone terminal. You can set the IMEI you want. To change IMEI without the need to use any external means, laptops, desktops, and so on, it will only take you a few seconds. And if you take and, for example, make yourself a small script on the desktop that will execute the same commands, then it will take you only 1 second to change the IMEI. That's all. The solution to the problem is actually very simple. And if we're talking about PinePhone, you can check it out on the pine64.org website. I am not affiliated with this web resource in any way. I do not have any promo codes, I do not teach or work with them. In fact, there is not much to teach there. But among all the phones that are currently aimed at changing the IMEI, this phone is the top end. And the most interesting thing is that its price in the basic configuration is only $149, and in the top configuration, $400. This phone is based on the Linux operating system, and you don't have to be afraid of it at all. And this, on the contrary, is a big plus. Why? Because in this phone you can, in fact, this is the only phone in which you can competently organize an information storage system. Plus, implement 100% the method of plausible denial when your crypto container inside this phone will have 2 passwords for it. And accordingly, well, at the moment, among all the decisions, this is, in my subjective opinion, just the top. Especially for such money, when you can buy a device that changes the IMEI in 1 second for $150. At the moment, no seller can offer this on any of the forums. So I recommend that you familiarize yourself with it, but I would like to say a few words about this phone right away. You will not be able to work with bookmakers, for example, poker, banks, or any other web resources on it. That is, you can, but not in the form you would like. That is, this is not a full-fledged multi-accounting and so on. Why? Because the phone is very specific, and any application that you will install on it, it will certainly see the device on which it is installed. These devices are unique, but nevertheless, if you change the IMEI correctly, then no uniqueness of this device in the cellular network will be visible. And for our main goal, and the main goal is to replace the IMEI for the mobile operator, this is the top among all. You won't find a better one at all. But if we dig into anti-fraud and IMEI changes, there is also a brand of phones called Infinix. Just in case, I'll dump the information into the chat now. You can find these phones on any marketplaces. They are very cheap, that is in the area too, they're a couple of $100s. The top model, if I'm not mistaken, costs only $300 and looks, by the way, very cool. So I recommend watching it. But if we are talking about Infinix brand phones, you will have to download the official service app that will allow you to change the IMEI when connected to the computer. Of course, it is not as convenient as PinePhone, but nevertheless, if we consider multi-accounting itself, then this is already a pretty big plus, because if we delve into the topic of multi-accounting and anti-detection, in fact, all the devices that we can work with now have the same problem. this is a problem with accessing and modifying data in the NVRAM or in the modem secure storage. This is the storage that stores the most intimate information about the hardware of our phone. And as I told you earlier, at the moment, phones for the most part do not support. I might of course miss some specific Samsung model that was released with a bug, for example, allowing access to the modem's storage. Maybe there is such a thing, because there are many phone models. It is necessary to check each of the facts. That's it. But if within the framework of the topic and aspects of our today's webinar, and this is anonymity, then I still recommend paying attention directly to the PinePhone. For this kind of money, it will allow you to implement everything you need. But if the person who will distribute these phones adds some security options to these phones, such as kill switches, various kinds of redirections, air, correct torification, and so on, as well as a set of user scripts, then such a person can actually turn the PinePhone phone into the ultimate device for anonymity. I also think that I will even shoot more than one webinar about such devices, if it is implemented well. Well, as I promised, our webinar today is extremely short, only 55 minutes. And at the end of this webinar, before moving on to the answers to the questions, I would like to once again convey to you the main idea. Unfortunately, users, when they buy a device in the market, forum somewhere, they can be confused and can confuse the parameters of software change and hardware change. Sellers are also not always interested in a person figuring it out. Their interest is primarily the sale of their product. And unfortunately, if a person is not technically savvy, does not have any technical means, he will not be able to identify this substitution in any way. And accordingly, by buying an illusory phone, a person only risks his freedom, his security, and his money. This, of course, cannot be allowed. So when you buy some kind of homemade phone from some dealer on a forum, know that you may have a situation like this, as I like to say, I kiss you gently on the lips, but my dick is near your asshole. This is exactly what can happen to you. So if you don't want that, take a minute to educate yourself. As I say about anti-detect, it's the most important anti-detect in your head. The same is true here. If you delve a little, at least a little, into the topic, look at the device with which you will work, you will be able to ensure your safety by your own means. Well, for everyone else who wants to implement such a business, write to me later. I will be happy to see how you did it, because at the moment there is nothing but bullshit on the market. Thank you for your attention. You had the Vector T13 with you, and now we move on to answering the questions. So, Vector Top User. The Vector Top User was well prepared, but unfortunately did not listen to me well. The fact is that I wrote in the Telegram group that we will consider only issues that relate to today's webinar. So, alas, I advise you to write them down and ask them next time. Then also user Leonid. The same thing. I prepared well, but unfortunately, in this case, all the questions that I see now, they have nothing to do with our webinar. The only thing I can say to Leonid is that I'm watching him, and there's no point in him worrying. This is the only message I would like to give. Next is the next question. Question from a user, Bombalio Top. Show your Android anti-detect, at least what is already there. Very interesting. I think you'll see in the YouTube video presentation when it's fully ready indeed. Next. Oh, David, greetings to you too. So, user. Who do we have here? A lot. User 0 Day writes, I'm expecting a fool who will whine about the A-way, the X-way, the hooks, but he apparently knows better from his Voronezh who will whine about what. If I had spent time not on hate, but on something good, maybe I would have moved to a normal place. Well, it's not for me to judge. So next, going. User Karen is coming. We need plug-and-play solution like one click to randomize correct parameters that generate real fingerprints at and email change. Dear Karen, I guess you will see something like that in my future anti-detect virtual machine release, because there will be Android support and all of the fingerprints and all of the hardware can be spoofed without any issues. Next, there is a question from user DE. Now there are many solutions on the market that allow you to replace all Android identifiers. As a rule, one substitution costs about $1. Android Faker as an example. How will your product differ from such programs? First, why? Because this is the first time I've heard about it. Excuse my illiteracy. Second, well, I have implemented a VM-based anti-detect. That is, accordingly, in anti-detect Android, I will replace the hardware and SIM card data in the same way. And why should I compete with someone then? These are not my questions, these are their questions, what they will do next. So alas. Thus Crater 2. Dimitri, hello. Hello, Crater 2. There is such a phone called Bespol phone. I was also at Pavel's webinars. To be honest, I may not be entirely correct, but I noticed that it has a very good cap. Well, that is a balaclava. That's it, that's what I noticed. As for the rest, unfortunately, I did not touch this product with my hands, and in no way do I want to say anything bad about this product. No, I just don't know him. I don't know him because, well, I wasn't particularly interested in such products because I try to create my own something and not monkey with someone. But as far as I have seen, the man is well versed in his topic, and I can wish him good luck. It has a quality product, as far as I know, it has a lot of fans, and it deserves a lot of respect. Next, again, a question from user D. Question number 2. What is your opinion about Play Integrity API Checker? It's a smartphone app that checks the integrity of the phone. Was the bootloader unlocked, and so on, yes, and so on. Can this application be considered an indicator that the smartphone is configured correctly? Yes, indeed, this application can be considered an indicator that the smartphone is configured correctly, together with safety net, of course. The fact is that if we are talking again, as part of our today's webinar about changing the IMEI, then programs cannot get it if, for example, the same Xposed is launched, right? Programs, for the most part, cannot access one directly. Accordingly, they will not be able to find out whether the IMEI has been replaced or not. But here, I would also like to note right away that I can now be caught by my tongue, that I am raising everything to the absolute. But no, there are always exceptions, of course. And the same Xposed techniques, they are subject to circumvention in the same way. The only question is whether your application will use any workaround techniques. So, in general, I would say that yes, you can use this as an indicator that everything is set up correctly. Next question from the user Lost. Will anti-detect work on x86 processors? If so, wouldn't any advanced anti-fraud burn ARM emulation? Yes, if you run Android on x86, there will be problems. But I hasten to console you. And I console you with the following. If you pay attention to the changelog of the official VirtualBox project, then starting from October or September, I may be confused now, they have added almost full support for ARM. And in fact, now the delay in the release of anti-detect, that is, the delay in the release of Android emulation inside virtual machines, is associated with some fixes that I am waiting for directly from Oracle. They released the update on the 17th of January. And if you look at their timelines, how often they release updates, the next update should be somewhere around the 17th or 21st of March. And this, we can say, will be the release date of anti-detect. Why? Because when it comes to emulating ARM processors, they really need fixes, which, well, I think they implement much better than I do. Well, we'll see in practice. So you're absolutely right, but you don't have to worry. We will have ARM emulation itself. Well, by the way, yes, from ARM emulation comes the ability to emulate modern macOS, which was already forgotten a long time ago. But everything in order. Unfortunately, you have only one vector, and I don't have enough for everything either. But nevertheless, macOS is already on the pencil along with Chrome OS. But Chrome OS, by the way, may arrive even earlier, maybe next week. I will not promise, so that later they will not say what I promised. Next. Another question. Proxy. What do you think is the best way to proxy an Android smartphone? In my opinion, it is best to proxy an Android smartphone using a router. This is the best option, and for the applications that will be installed, it will be absolutely normal behavior. And in terms of ease of work, it seems to me too. So I hope this helps you. So, the following. Question from Dylan. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, Dylan. Will it be possible to use anti-detect on Android to spoof Glovo, Uber delivery apps in motion to increase the distance between points A, B? Yes, it can be done. This functionality has already been implemented. By the way, I implemented it. I'll tell you how. Once upon a time, probably in 2016, I was very impressed by the Pokemon Go toy. Well, you probably know, then everyone was sick of it. Unfortunately, I was sick with it for a short time, literally only a couple of days, but it was the bot that interested me very much. And it was that bot, which allows simulating walking, that I took from there for Android. So, a question. Okay then. Big question from Blank. Thank you right away to Blank for preparing so well. So, let's read. Hello Vector, thank you for the webinar. Hi Blank, thank you very much for attending my webinar. With what? Question 1. What difficulties did you face when implementing anti-detect on Android? It takes a tremendous amount of effort to achieve a crystal clear mid-strong integrity device. It does not take absolutely any amount of effort. I will explain to you why. I'm not going to release a separate device with anti-detect. I'm going to release a virtual machine where you can implement, where you can install Android. And if we talk about complexity, there are several difficulties. The first difficulty is, of course, with the unfinished processor, the unfinished implementation of Oracle's ARM. Unfortunately, even if you look at their source code, there are a huge number of comments to do. That is, it needs to be implemented. I really hope that, of course, they will implement everything in their next update. But if they don't, then we're going to have to release the version that's there now. I'd call it a beta version, maybe a beta version, or rather an alpha version, because I've tried to change it myself to patch up these holes in the CPU implementation myself. Well, I'll try. We'll see. And the second difficulty is the implementation of fastboot and bootloader. That is, in order to comply with the completely correct installation cycle of the operating system. After all, if we look at the history of VirtualBox, we know that there are Android images. You can create a standard Linux machine in VirtualBox, install this one there, not install it, but download the Android image, and everything supposedly works for you. But in fact, this is not an emulation, this is a simulation. It's quite a big difference, like the change and substitution that we've been talking about today. So, yes, these are the two biggest challenges. The rest is not a problem. Because if you've been paying attention, just recently, I'll tell you this, I accomplished my own small, possibly unnoticeable to many of you, but incredibly cool triumph. I didn't just write it. I wrote a network card and a driver for that network card from scratch. And it all worked. And you can see it, the Type 9 anti-detect has a Wi-Fi emulation system. That is completely from scratch. This is not a device taken somewhere. This is a completely implemented device from scratch. The fact that I called it Realtek is not because I had the Realtek source code, but just to mimic the real things. So why am I saying this? Writing a driver for Windows, well, I would say so, is probably 1,000 times more difficult than writing a Windows device, 1,000 times more difficult than writing one for Android. Therefore, the implementation of all the equipment that is currently there is absolutely no difficulty. Please, a compass, an accelerometer, all that is needed is actually a couple of trifles. Next, question number 2. How will anti-detect bypass application checks? Will there also be a subscription system at the level of tariffs, where a separate work is carried out for each application? I understand you. You mean presets, probably. At first, there will be no presets for individual programs. That is, the most important thing now is to cover the largest volume of all existing cases. And then, if there are any specific cases that require special attention, something may appear for them. But for now, there will be one single Android in the form of simple, it's just a phone, and that's it. Next is the third question. Will there be a free version, like the student one, so that there is an opportunity to touch the product and evaluate the performance, convenience? I will explain why. The thing is, to implement a full-fledged exam version, I do plan to include Android, but only after a well-designed commercial version is released and all bugs are fixed. So yes, not in full functionality, most likely. I can share such an insider that in the free version there will be, relatively speaking, only 5 models, and that's basically it. That's at the same time as in the paid versions, the number will be correspondingly much larger. Question number 4. Will it be possible to put your own firmware images for experiments or only ready-made tested images? I will try to achieve, I will not think in advance now, but I will try to achieve maximum similarity with real devices. In other words, those firmware that are suitable, for example, for Samsung Galaxy, they will be suitable for Samsung Galaxy wrappers. But there are always correlations, some force majeure. So I'm not ready to answer such a comprehensive question now because it requires testing. The fifth question, how will the periphery be connected and are there any plans? Conditional microphone, microPHO-E, conditional cameras, microphones, maybe even external SIM cards through an adapter, as in the conditional virtual box. There is no point in installing an external SIM card. I will explain why. Because I'm not making this emulation to be able to make calls, at least for now. Of course, a phone without a SIM card is bad, but we have full SIM card emulation. There are actually values. There are 5 values in order to emulate a SIM card. Well, it's not difficult. About the camera, the microphone, USB camera. The implementation is similar to the one we have now in the regular anti-detect microphone. And what about the microphone? Please can connect any of your microphones and the sound will be transmitted directly. This is a standard feature of the virtual box, simply micro-broadcast audio to the microphone. So I don't see any particular difficulties in this case. Sixth question. The following question is similar. How will GPS, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth devices and proxies work? By Bluetooth devices, Bluetooth environment is not yet implemented. In particular, I said that I would even do this on Windows after the implementation of Wi-Fi. Therefore, there is Bluetooth, it turns on off, but it does not see the surrounding devices at the moment. GPS works without any problems. Wi-Fi has just been implemented, and most importantly, we have gained a lot of experience with the standard, how it should work normally, efficiently, therefore, it is also not a special problem. That's it. And the same system, the same principles that now allow you to replace Wi-Fi in the usual anti-detect will be implemented in Android. But still, I would like to thank you very much for your questions, dear blank, but I would like more questions not about anti-detect, but about our topic today. Thus, the Black Lord asks, when will there be a guide for personal computers? Well, I plan to record this weekend. Let me explain. Well, come on. Okay, since I've already approved the Black Lord's question. Black Lord, what is the micro delay now? Enter hand manually to the net. Well, let's just say I'll write down a guide on how to manually enter nets. In a couple of days, I will implement automatic network substitution and I will have to overwrite it again. Why do I need it? Therefore, I still want to spend a couple of days of my life in order to add the final touch there. This is the automatic substitution of subnets for the geolocation that the user sets. I implement it. It's not difficult, it just requires perseverance and my time. And maybe this weekend I will implement it and on Monday I will be able to record it. Don't take me at my word, I'm trying to do it as quickly as possible. So, the next question. Question from user AIA. What do you think of Blue Merlin? Alas, I don't know what it is, unfortunately. Next question. Question from Skydiver1. Greetings, Vector. Greetings, Skydiver1. Thank you for the webinars and the work in general. Thank you very much for enjoying my work. I am very pleased to hear this. The question is as follows. Surely you have heard how Vasya Bespolyphon performed at Pavel Kavsky's. What can you say about his project in general? According to him, there is a physical device plus software. This is better, say, than Graphene OS. Skydiver1, I have already answered today. Unfortunately, I am not so familiar with his product. Well, I just didn't have a chance to meet somehow, alas. Maybe someday we'll do something together. Maybe it's going to be like that. Or maybe neither he nor I don't give up. It won't fall, you know. Therefore, I cannot say anything because, alas, unfortunately, I am not familiar with the product. Sorry. Next is a question from the user Proxomatron. Dimitri, what do you hear on crypto cards for purchases? Nothing is heard, because everything depends only on me. And I had a month busy just issuing the 9th type of implementation of all bug fixes that are related to Wi-Fi. I will try to get there in the near future, but to be honest, the issue is not even a priority. I will explain why. We have the same turnover on the cards now as I have. I'm afraid not to break anything. Let's put it this way. It goes so well with 222 that it's time to expand the garage. That's why I can't say yet. Alas, he did not. You need to look at the statistics and requests from supports, what people need. So next, the next question. Question from George. Dear Dimitri, please tell me how you can beautifully twist where to look when working with Ticketmaster. Will the phone help? The last 6 months are just a nightmare, impossible. In your anti-fraud course, I found interesting moments at the moment. It helped for a while. Tell me, please. Thank you. Ticketmaster loves OSINT very much. Why? Because they have their own artificial intelligence, which checks users for their activity in general on the network. If this user is not present anywhere, then accordingly this problem happens. How can you get out? I'll tell you now. Very simple. Put it there without any problems, spend half an hour of your time, install the OpenClaw bot there, give the OpenClaw bot instructions, give it an email box with a login, password in its teeth, and send it on a free float. Come back in a few days, put a review on Trustpilot on his behalf, and you have no problems and no ban. And if you make it in such a way that your bots will not be one, for example, but you will have 100 of these bots and you can clone them simply. Why did I say VPS for $5? Because you can set it up once and then simply clone. You won't have any trouble circumventing a trust on Trustpilot. I hope this helps you. OpenClaw is such a revolution that it's unbelievable. So, a question from the user Lucas. Greetings, Vector T13. On one of the slides, one more country is missing, Ecuador. Look, it's been like this for 15 years, but they block it even before 90 days. However, only Android is blocked, but the IMEI iOS is not blocked for some reason. Dear Lucas, if we go back to the very beginning of our webinar, the first one we have is the TAC type, 8 digits. This is exactly the type this is exactly the encrypted device. So basically, if you want, you can change the IMEI to iPhone on Android. And in principle, this issue will be solved in Ecuador. And if you're in Ecuador, this wonderful country that I've been dreaming of visiting for a long time, then the iPhone phone will come to you in just a couple of days. You can try to implement this there. I think that this will be an interesting case, and it will completely satisfy you. How to do it? Once again, if you happen to have an Apple store, never go there, never pick up your phone from the rack, and never enter the combination *06 grill. I will explain why. Because these phones are only for domestic sale. They can even, I don't even know if they have any specific IMEI or not. Therefore, it would be better to contact some private dealer, maybe, and see accordingly the phone number of a private dealer. If you have, for example, double, that is, 2 identical IMEIs will be in the cellular network, in principle, even mobile operators in most cases treat this normally. That's it. But why? Because they don't want to ban a legitimate person. But the change is, well, at least you'll have a pattern so that you can implement your ID. And if, for example, you ask some online woman to enter an asterisk, a grid, a 0, a 6, a grid, for example, which is located in the USA, and show you the result of the output, then you will have an absolutely legitimate IMEI. Well, that's all. Or you can pretend to be some kind of master on some forum there, I don't know, and collect these IMEIs. Or create just a small website that will collect these IMEIs for you under the guise of, for example, unlocking or distributing bitcoins. What is not there? Question from user Verto. Well, by the way, user Lucas, thank you very much for the information about Ecuador. By the way, this is another confirmation that the system to which we are all accustomed, unfortunately, will not work for long, and all countries are slowly starting to screw on these mechanisms. Vector, hello. On the internet, they write that in addition to IMEI, another ID has appeared in phones of recent years, which is called EID, which is responsible for eSIM. Look, you have a radio module. The radio module doesn't care if it's a physical SIM card or it's an eSIM, it doesn't care at all. EID in this case is simply the identifier of the SIM card itself. If you have an iPhone, and most likely it is, then enter an asterisk, a grid, 0, 6, a pound, and you will see this identifier at the very top first, if I understand you correctly. So, user Mr. X writes, budget stylus Motorola's are easily routed and allow you to change the IMEI. Mr. X, thank you very much for the information. I think users will be interested in giving it a try if maybe someone has a Motorola like this. Unfortunately, I do not have such information. I did not work with this device. But again, if it is, well, how to change the IMEI? Programmatically, if you say rooted, then you want to root it in order to install some software that can actually do the same thing as Xposed. That is not a replacement, but a substitution. But in this case, it is necessary to understand. But in any case, thank you for the information. So, a question from user Anna. Hello, and what smartphone does the Vector T13 itself use? I have two phones. One of them is the iPhone Air, the second is the OnePlus 7T. Next question from the user Andro. There is an IMEI repair that is sewn directly into the modem, so you can sew into these. Andro, you're absolutely right. There is, well, we see that the mobile phone market is quite large. That is, we don't get attached to one specific model, for example Samsung, right? That is, there are a huge number of Chinese people who, well, maybe brands that you have not even heard of. And it is quite possible that there is such a plan for implementation. In my webinar today, I wanted to offer the easiest way for users. And again, if we are talking, do not confuse the concept of anti-fraud and multi-accounting and anonymity. If we're talking about anonymity, then none of the phones, well, I'm not going to be 100% sure, but I suspect that none of the phones will be able to implement proper file encryption in the way that they can on the Linux operating system in the PinePhone. But also thank you very much for your opinion. We will wrap up soon because there are still quite a few questions. But nonetheless, no, not much left. Let's move on. Question from NNP2. The question is not about anonymity. A hypothetical Google app, such as the Play Store and so on, have access to IMEI and other identifiers only through the telephone API. As far as I know, yes. I may be mistaken because I have not carried out any reverse in the last 2 years, probably, and accordingly, there was simply no need for it. And accordingly, I cannot say 100% that this is so. However, the standard Play Store only accesses IMEI via the telephone API. As I said earlier, today there is a possibility of bypassing, and indirectly obtaining a real IMEI, but this is more, let's say, as an undocumented possibility and perhaps still binding to a specific model. In general, legitimate applications should not do this. Next is a question from user Dylan. That is, there will be motion emulation, there is traffic, there is no terrain, there are no traffic lights. And wait, I understand you. No. There are no traffic lights, no terrain, only movement. To be honest, I didn't. You have even put me in a small stump now. I didn't wonder about traffic lights, I didn't. Thank you very much, user Dylan. I'll take note of it, because it's an interesting question. I didn't realize it 100%, just movement. So, Vasya Petrov. Hello Dimitri, hello Vasya Petrov. Will I be able to pass Know Your Customer if I only have an image of a document and a video of my head spinning? Vasya Petrov, just like all the other users who are present here, I do not help to pass Know Your Customer in any way. I don't help you bypass two-factor authentication. This is not my bread. Therefore, unfortunately, in this case, I cannot help you. In the same way, I cannot prevent the use of my software in the implementation of such actions by various kinds of people. But I warn you that in this case, it is, let's say, not good things. Of course, I cannot take part in them. Next is the next question. Question from Mr. X. Everything is okay on the networks? Checked. Mr. X, great information. Look, let's do it again. User Mr. X says that Motorola Budget stylus type is easily rooted and allows you to change IMEI. Everything is okay on the networks? Checked. I would like to know how you watched, probably with the help of MCI Catcher. If so, then this is just a case. And I, Mr. X, if you managed to do this, well, I could even talk about you at some webinar if you open, for example, your own service. Because it's really cool. It's cool. I, for one, have not heard of this. I don't have such information. Therefore, if you succeeded, that's it. This is the way to success. Next. You've tested the Wolf operator, Mr. X says. Well, it's super, it's wonderful. By the way, look how wonderful it is that this topic was brought up for discussion. After all, the user Mr. X found a path that I didn't know about. And indeed, if everything works like this, then even for those users who want to combine both anonymity and multi-accounting, this will be a great option. Maybe you won't even need my Android anti-detect. So, Mr. X, I have a lot of respect to you. Next is the next question. A question from a user, well, apparently it says trainer here. I once held a Samsung in my hands, according to rumors from Special Communications. It was fold, closed, opened, IMEI changed. At that time, it was something incredible for me. But I understand correctly that it was just a substitution. And the operator saw the real IMEI. Coach, unfortunately, I can't tell you that, but apparently it was so. Well, because, first of all, if it's, well, a special connection, well, look, if that's it, if you mean it's a state-owned enterprise, I very much doubt that a state-owned enterprise would use an image model for its employees. Second, closed, opened, IMEI changed. Where is the logic? Why? Because where? Well, you have the same SIM card in your phone. That is, the operator records with your SIM card that he constantly changes the phone on the same SIM card. That is, there is an impression of some kind of anonymous fucker who forces the same SIM card, walks around with 20 phones, or there, with 50, for example, and puts the same SIM card into different phones. Well, so I very much doubt that it happened. Most likely it was still some, well, not quite a real device. I mean, most likely an ordinary substitution and not a change. Next is a question from user Wright. What are the best anti-detections on phones now? Which ones would you highlight, which can adequately work with multi-accounting within hardware devices? Thank you for the webinar, and thank you so much, Wright, for attending my webinar. Alas, I can't say anything good or bad about Android anti-detect. I will explain why. Because I haven't explored this niche at all. In preparation for this webinar that took place today, I will explain where it came from. Users write about Android. I asked for support. Here we have supports collect various kinds of information in directions. I asked them to give me a layout on Android which people are interested in. And among all the requests, the largest number was just requests for changing the IMEI. Therefore, the webinar was not even planned there in a week, for example. In 2, it was planned yesterday. I saw it, I think, well, let's analyze this topic. Because in fact, I did not see any solutions on the market. Although, for example, the user Mr. X said that there is such a solution. Maybe they don't sell it, I don't know, maybe they sell it on a forum where, for example, I haven't yet entered, I haven't seen it somewhere. This can also happen. So as for Android hardware anti-detectors, I unfortunately did not do such a study. And if it is necessary, maybe within the framework in the future, in order to compare my anti-detect with existing solutions, maybe we can play around there. So far, I can't single out anyone separately. Next. Question from Adam regarding anti-fraud. Will the conditionally installed PayPal and Best Buy app on your Android anti-detect be more trusted compared to a browser? Of course, 100%. This is what everything is done for, because the level of trust, when it is installed by the application, and not just by the browser from the phone, is much higher. So, a question from user Wright, or rather, a statement from user Wright. Thank you. Well, at the moment, I have answered all the questions that related to the topic of our today's anti-detect. Thank you very much for your attention. And I will immediately give a small announcement for the future. What webinars can we expect in the near future? I have several webinars scheduled, one of them on messengers. If you remember about anonymity, the anonymity of messengers interested quite a large number of people and wrote to supports. So, in principle, we can expect this webinar. Well, I have another big bomb that has to do with the consumables that users use. I think you will be interested, but for now I will keep it intrigued. Thank you all very much for your attention. You had a Vector T13 with you. Leave your reviews, good and bad. In any case, good reviews will motivate me to do something better, and bad reviews will motivate me to do better than myself. Thank you for your attention. You had a Vector T13 with you. I wish you a pleasant Thursday. All the best. See you soon at the next webinar.